trigger warning, just like we did in the previous one.
Yeah, gonna do trigger warning and some disclosure. We're not professional musicians. We don't have degrees in music, so this is all based on our music, our love for music, our love for this genre, and but we know that there's a lot of people who can relate to this, and I think this part of the conversation is going to be tying the some of the experiences that were highlighted in the documentary. And I think fundamentally, I think a lot of what the documentary shows is how after the era of MTV Latino, how there was a development this Latino identity and based in large part based by a shared experience, but also very particular experiences that each of us were having depending on what part of the continent were you in? So were you still in your home country, or have you and your parents migrated to the United States or in other parts? But I know that you had that that special connection with rock en español just because of what it signified for you. So I guess do you want to say a little bit more about the songs and the music, how you identified with rock en español as you were in your formative years?
Yeah, and it's like we're kind of continuing on a topic that we touched on in our previous discussion. So we briefly mentioned this. I discovered rock en español when I had already come to the U.S. So when I was in
Mhm.
Mexico, everything in Mexico, we grew up in a small town, so everything was rancheras and mariachi and corridos. That was our music, and some pop, like some American pop. Like I mean, we all knew about
Son
Michael Jackson.
Timbiriche,
What's that?
some Timbiriche.
Timbiriche, No Controles. I forget what band that was.
No controles
Um,
mis sentidos. Gloria Trevi.
Gloria Trevi and some American bands like Michael Jackson. Really, I had a T-shirt when I was a kid. I was like 7 years old. I had a T-shirt that Michael Jackson.
Me too.
Oh, you
Favorite.
did?
I wanted to be like Michael Jackson. I wanted to moonwalk like he did, and it was miserable experience. I was like, how does he do it?
Yeah. So I come to the U.S. and then I'm already a late '90s teenager, and one of my one of our friends from the family, he had grown up in the city. So usually the city people were more into the rock and español scene than
Hmm.
the rancheritos from the towns like myself.
Los
And
paisas.
what's that?
Los paisas.
Yeah, los paisas. And so we were at his place once for a weekend, and he pops in a CD, and it's this CD that somebody had put together, and it was like the
Hmm.
best rock en español songs from like the 80s and early 90s.
And you fell
And
in love right
dude, it
away.
was like you gotta understand, man. It's like it's to me, it's still one of the best first three or four songs ever in a CD, just because of the way that the DJ was able to blend them together from one song to the other. So it
Damn.
started with Héroes del Silencio. I know they're from Spain, and we'll get a little more into Bomburi later because it turns out that he's a big plagiarizer as well. Like this guy was literally plagiarizing entire passages from books, from different books,
Wow.
and piecing them together to make his songs. But anyway, at the time I didn't know any of that. So empieza con Entre Dos Tierras, and then just that hard guitar, and then the way that he sings too, which later on I found out he was just kind of imitating Jim Morrison from the Doors. Anyway, I liked all that. And then the second song that comes on is as the Entre Dos Tierras is winding down. It does like a perfect transition into Caifanes' Perdí mi ojo de venado, which is
Mm.
like just perfect. And then cuando se acaba Perdí mi ojo de venado, empieza. Did I just switch to Spanish?
Yeah,
Damn, that was
you did.
crazy. Maybe like it tapped into like a memory from that time.
Es que rock en español se entiende en el
Yeah, dude,
español,
I
güey.
felt it so much. I switched to Spanish without even realizing it. So it switched to from Perdí mi ojo de venado. It went to Los Prisioneros, Tren al Sur. Again,
Oh
just like a
man.
perfect blend. And then eventually, there was some Maná in there. There was some Duncan Du was also there, and Anitos Verdes. So it's like I think there were some songs de Soda Stereo. So like all of
Mm.
the best songs were there. And so when I discovered it, I fell in love with the music, and all of a sudden I'm
Your
like,
ears popped.
yeah, because we grew up on hip hop too. When we were in the U.S., we got into hip hop, And then when the rock en español wave came, like in the late '90s, we all got into it. And my brother actually got into it even more than I did, because even though I liked the music, I was always really cheap. I never bought the albums. I was very
Yeah,
frugal
well,
with my
neither
money.
did I. I remember when growing up, there was only really, I mean, there were some record stores, but Latino record stores. I think there was El Ñañito Record Shop
Yeah.
in Central Falls, and that was it until Columbia House came and you can get CDs in the mail.
Yeah, and and so I was very frugal. So I would just listen on the radio or listen to whatever other CDs we had. But my brother wasn't like that. My brother, if he liked music, he went out and bought it. So we
Mm,
ended up getting a lot of good music, or I ended up listening to a lot of good music because of him. He
thanks
got
to
it.
your brother.
Yeah, but I remember distinctly one time in high school, just you're with your buddies and you're talking about music, and you want to tell them the music that you like because you think that this music is amazing and you feel like you've discovered something that's great. So I play for him a song, and he's like, "Oh, that's just they're just ripping off um, like an English band or an American band." And I was like, "No, they're not. I've never heard this in English." Well, of course, right? Because I had never really I had listened to just hip hop in English. So yeah, sure enough, that the dominoes, as I mentioned in the previous episode, the dominoes started falling with first Duncan Du. I realized when my brother, eventually we started listening to English music. So my brother got into Depeche Mode, he got into the Smiths, he got into The Cure, and then I started listening to all that music, and I started realizing like, oh crap, Duncan Du's en algún lugar is just a blatant ripoff of the Smiths. And then when I started listening to the Police, I realized also that Soda Stereo and Mana like sampled and really borrowed or took a lot from the Police. So
Hmm.
yeah, it was deflating. It was very disappointing to find out that the music that I liked so much was really just very derivative. And so, as I mentioned before, ever since then, I've always placed more weight, and I've always been more interested in the bands that manage to create their own sound. But nonetheless, just being able to experience and connect to rock en español in the late '90s, it was really a great experience to listen to all that music, and then later on, as I met Latinos from other cultures outside of Mexico or Central America, to also know that they were into that music.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, every time I hear Tren al Sur, I just get goosebumps, and I think the part of that is just like the la melancolía de la canción, and also the
Hmm.
sounds. The fact that it's one of the first times that you hear like the traditional Andean music incorporated into popular music, so that the guitar, sometimes and when you hear Nanitos Verdes, you hear the ciscus in
Hmm.
the beginning. So you hear those amazing, like, Andean native indigenous sounds, and then they just hit the heart. They just have, because for me, that's my heritage, and I know that, I wish I would have learned more about my native traditions when I was in Colombia, and unfortunately in Colombia we're still in the type of situation where everything native is looked down upon, right? Like, our mind was drilled to, you need to look like Spain, you need to be like the US, you need to be quote unquote sophisticated, that a lot of people grew up without appreciating or being exposed to that music until much later. So anyways, I think that I know that that's part of the reasons why those sounds and those artists have a special place in my musical heart.
Yeah, and some bands were better than others at incorporating that native sound and then blending it in.
Hmm.
And yeah, those songs I do enjoy them a lot. It's not to say that I don't enjoy songs that, even if it's a knockoff of the Police, I still like them. I still like Duncan Du in Spanish. I even learned
I've seen
like,
you dancing to them.
yeah, I tried to learn how to play the guitar so I could play the song, and and it's good, but the objective side of me, the part of me that is looking not just at my own pleasure in the music, the part of me that's looking at my identity collectively with the rest of Latin America, that part tells me that I wish there had been more bands that would have created their own unique sound, so that we could have really had something that we could say, this is really ours. I can take this song to anyone in the world and they can't say this is just a knockoff of some other band. And I mean, there's a few songs that you could do that with. For example, I mean, going back to the source again, if you go to Richie Valens, okay, like pretty unique song, even though it's sung in Spanish, La Bamba. If you go
Hmm.
to the stuff that Santana was doing, pretty unique. Like you take that anywhere, and you don't find that sound being created anywhere else outside of outside of Latin America or the U.S. And then Los Jaivas too. Like I'll be honest. Like I said before, I only started listening to them because of this documentary because I discovered them through it, and I really enjoy their sound. I've only listened to like four or five of their songs, but I really like them. And it's kind of disappointing that more Latin American bands didn't adopt Los Jaivas and Santana as a template for what they should have been doing. It's like when the Beatles mania came, everyone just went crazy for that. Like too crazy that they found success doing that sound, and then they just started doing it, so it became very like pop, a very pop sound that was commercially successful. And so I can see why there was appeal there, because they were creating good music for the for the Spanish speaking audience, and they were loving it up like I was in the 90s because I didn't know any better. And I suspect that there's a lot of Latino Americanos that have no idea that the music that they love so much is very derivative, and if they find out, they might not even care. But to me it
Hmm.
matters, because at the end of the day, I'm dreaming big. I always wanted to have bands that could stand toe to toe with any band from England or from the US, in rock and roll, right? In that specific genre.
Yeah, and I think you're describing what actually happened in the documentary, where there was chances are people did know the American originals and they really liked them, and then they really liked when they heard Spanish uh, bands that were able to do it in Spanish, rock en tu idioma. And then once they got into that, then they realized, wait, there's more. There's like better alternative music, and there's richer music because of the contributions of our indigenous background and our Afro roots. So when you think of the two artists that you mentioned, Richie Valens, Santana, both of them were playing music that fundamentally was Afrocentric,
Yeah.
Afro-Caribbean, right? You have some jarocho, which is with La Bamba and the style. And yes, it doesn't sound the same when you hear them, but you can tell like the very son jarocho roots of La Bamba, and then when you hear all of the drumming and Afro sounds, Afro Latino sounds from the Caribbean, from Puerto Rico, from the Dominican Republic, Cuba, and other parts. Like you also hear that part of why that sound is so good is because it has a good part of it is based on that Afro Latino Afro descendant music.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that actually, because it reminded me. Remember how I complained in the first episode after in our first recording, after I had seen the first three episodes, that they didn't even acknowledge the origins of rock in the black
Yeah.
community. And so
Hmm.
I felt like it was also one of the problems that I have with Caifanes not getting a bigger time or more time, is because I think of all of the bands that they featured there from the 80s, I think Caifanes was probably one of the first to also look for inspiration in the Afro Latino community,
Hmm.
because they went straight to Cuba, and they got La Negra Tomasa, which is more of a salsa song.
Yeah, a
And
son. Yeah, like a slower version of
yeah,
salsa.
and they turned it into like a hybrid of it's really like a cumbia. They turned it into a cumbia.
Yeah.
But when all the other bands were drawing inspiration from Europe, or some of them from the indigenous roots, here's one band that says, "Fuck it, we're just gonna go straight to like the source of a lot of our rhythms," and they go
Hmm.
to Cuba and they bring this song that it just blew up. And so it over and over we see that once you infuse the rock with those elements of our culture, whether indigenous or well, mainly the Afro elements, Richie Valens, Santana, and Caifanes, you get huge hits, right? And so I think that they probably weren't interested in making those type of statements, but I feel like it would have been amazing had they mentioned that, because
Hmm.
it's important to support the type of bands that were doing that, because like, dude, I mean, if Mana, right? I mean, Mana wasn't featured that much, and I'm a huge Mana fan. I'm from Mexico, but I'm also brutally honest. I hope that I'm not coming across as biased here for one band or the other. I've always liked Mana, but again, you listen to Mana's first album when they were still Sombrero Verde, and you're just listening to the Police in Spanish, and that
Yeah.
sound never really evolved. Mana instead just went even more pop, to the point
Yeah.
where after Sueños Líquidos in 1996, it's like a lot of it is just like commercial, popular music that's like made for the masses, and it's unfortunate that's how it is when there's so much material that they could have drawn on from like the indigenous and the Afro Latino roots.
Yeah. And can I just say how ironic it is that Maná, probably the most popular Mexican Latino rock band, started as a band called Green Hat,
Yeah,
playing in English.
yeah.
And they're like they became like the sound of rock in Español. So is the irony of that is pretty is not lost on me. And I think the fact that there is this connection that everybody makes to that music and this amazing level. And I think once they get into reconnect with their essence and with their original sound, I think is when they come up with some of the songs that we know Maná for.
Hmm. And I forgot to also haven't really mentioned Capeta Cuba much, but I
Oh
also
man,
big
yeah,
fan
they're
of Capeta
they're
Cuba.
they're
Sorry, go
super
ahead.
creative.
Again, because if you listen to some of where they're drawing their inspiration from Juan Luis Guerra or Ojalá que llueva
Mhm.
café,
Oh yeah,
and I mean that's a
oh
great
that's such a
song,
good one.
and it's so unique too, because what other rock band is covering a song like that, and they completely
And son
transformed it.
jarocho,
What was that?
and they do it in son jarocho.
Right, and then they also do Como Te Extraño, which is a little more like pop sound, but it's still a pretty good song. And then
Ingrata.
La Ingrata, which is the more of a
Yeah.
polka type of Mexican polka type of song.
They were
So
super chilango.
yeah, oh, then La Chilanga Banda, yeah, like that song, dude. Like even when I heard it, I was like, dude, what the fuck is this? Because those Chilangos, they have their own language, but they're so creative, and they've actually managed to be successful at it, which is also really important when it comes to like this scene, that not only do you have to be able to create something new, but also be successful with it. Because anybody can
Yeah.
try to mix genres, but if you're not successful, if you don't sell records, if you're not known internationally, then it won't mean much if you're just playing out of your garage and only your neighbors know you and you make a great music, but nobody else does. There has to be some level of success with what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, which I think with the invent of CDs, obviously video, and again, I know the documentary makes this point about MTV and MTV Latino, and I feel now when you think about YouTube, right? So like YouTube is a new frontier where if you're a talented musician who's making music in their room or their mom's garage and you're good, you get picked up, you maybe get a deal, maybe you get some followers, and before you know it, you could potentially be a Bad Bunny wrestling on Monday Night Raw for the WWE.
Which, by the way, our video on Bad Bunny was blocked on YouTube for copyright infringement. So can't
Damn,
even share a Bad Bunny video to support him, because we get blocked by WWE.
he got sold out, man. He lost
Yeah.
his soul.
One other thing I'll mention, just because I know that in the first episode, I was a little bit more excited. I wasn't as critical of the genre. I think I was just waiting to finish the documentary to kind of just put my thoughts together and figure out what I wanted to say, because I wanted to see what else it would cover.
Hmm.
Um, Again, I try to be objective, and so I know that I am very critical, but it's also because I had such high hopes, or I have such high hopes for the genre. And you know, again, if I'm biased, then people definitely can call me out if they think I'm being biased. But I think I do have a track record of at least trying to be objective, and the one the proof that I'll use to back my case is
Hmm.
well, we all know, those that listen to the show, that I'm Mexican. So I grew up with El Tri. I grew up watching soccer. A huge fan. You gotta check in on me after Mexico gets knocked out of the World Cup every 4 years, just to make sure I'm doing okay, right? So I grew up with that. I grew up with soccer, like a lot of us did, with football, and
En corridos.
yeah, en corridos. And but I also grew up around a lot of people that were very delusional, that they pretended, or they claimed that Mexico is a powerhouse in soccer. When at some point I came to the realization that no, it's not. And I had to be brutally honest with myself and say, no, Mexico's a B team. It can beat um, Brazil. It can beat Argentina. It can beat England, Germany. We can beat Colombia sometimes. I think.
Hey, hey, hey. Don't talk about another a B plus team, okay? Get your get your
And
don't get Colombia out of your mouth.
if you were to watch Univision during the World Cup, or Telemundo, whichever channel is showing the games, I mean, they celebrate Mexico like if it's one of the best teams up there. And the
Yeah,
truth is
particularly
that,
here in the US too.
yeah, in the US, and the truth is that it's not. Like, it shows glimpses of being a great team, but it's just not consistent. It can't consistently beat good teams. And so to say these type of things in the Mexican community, which I always do, so when I'm around my friends, I always tell them, no, no,
Then you
I
might have
always try
lost
to
your Mexican card, my friend.
I always try to bring them down to earth, but it's like blasphemy to say these things. So I hope that I do try to be objective. So I just putting that out there, that I didn't want to come across as just someone that, I'm not hating on the genre. I'm being critical of it because it's the music that I identify with.
So what you think now? What do you think about the rock en español or música alternativa scene now? I know in the previous conversation you were saying that you feel that it's in the decline. Is that still your take right now?
Yeah, basically, the when Latino America, when rock en español blew up in Latino America in the 80s, rock was already on the general decline. And
Hmm.
so we have all these bands that came up in the 80s. But what happened in the 90s in the US? Like, grunge came on the scene with Nirvana. And that
Hmm.
completely, whatever was left of rock, it disappeared. And then you turn into like the alternative age. But also in the early 90s, you started getting hip hop and
Hmm.
gangster rap. So it was already like a changing of the guard. So in a way, Latino America kind of jumped on a sinking ship when it comes to rock en español, and it's been sinking ever since. We weren't able to elevate the genre and make it more popular. Now it's still on the decline, and now other genres have taken over. Reggaeton and trap en español has taken over, and maybe it was because the Latino bands weren't unique enough to innovate. I mean, we have Café Tacuba, we have others that tried, but maybe we just didn't have enough. I'm not saying that's the reason. It probably would have died even without it, but maybe we could have actually kept it going as our own version of music had we actually innovated more. But instead, we lost out. Those of us that like, I have rock en español, it's close to my heart because I grew up with it. But now we see reggaeton taking over, and I like reggaeton, but I didn't grow up with it. I don't have that same
Hmm.
connection, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because as you're fascinated by sort of the creation of the next genre and sort of using what we have now in the more creative representation, I think my fascination has been in observing the fact that we're going towards our roots, that a lot of our music and a lot of the music that is popular is going down to the roots of Afro music, of Afro Latino music, of native sounds, of indigenous sounds, and things like that. So, particularly with reggaeton, I know fundamentally is reggae en español, reggae, but a lot of the music that when you think of salsa, when you think of merengue, or when you think of all the tropical music, all of that rich tropical music is the foundation to so many of the artists
Hmm.
in reggaeton and within the salsa, and in Puerto Rico and so many other parts of Latin America, and also in Colombia and so many other countries in La República Dominicana. Even within those so popular sounds, there's other sounds within that are tropical, where you get the Juan Luis Guerras and the people who have followed them. So from my perspective, I think Latin American music is super rich, so rich. And then when you add Brazilian music, from samba to the capoeira stuff to the obviously now the funky,
Hmm.
like musically, Latin America as a continent is so rich in music, and a lot of that is because of our um, Afro influence. And then when you think about tango and all that music that motivated a lot of the dudes featured in this documentary, all of that stuff is from our strong Afro roots.
And so right now it's el tiempo de reggaeton. I think
Hmm.
that this genre is going to stay on top for a while, but music is cyclical. We might get another cycle of rock en español that makes a resurgence. It's possible that when that comes around, they look for inspiration in the bands that were experimenting, that were incorporating a lot more of the, like you said, Afro and indigenous sounds. So maybe they'll resurrect Los Jaivas, and then we'll get like a version 2 of Los Jaivas that is awesome, and then it just takes over the world and becomes super popular with a new sound, right?
Yeah,
It's
and
possible.
it's funny because it is possible. It's funny because when you said that, remembering that it's somewhat ironic that one of the number one reggaeton songs was Despacito by Luis Fonsi and Daddy Yankee. And when you think of Luis Fonsi, of his origins are like rock en español, música alternativa, and some amazing songs that he has. I mean, some amazing songs and sounds. But then one of the reasons that he gets popular outside of the people who kind of loved his original sound is through Despacito
Hmm.
and that reggaeton beat.
Yeah. And what about the other countries? Just briefly before as we wrap this up, what about other countries that have home sounds that are um, originate in that country and that keep developing and evolving? For example, if I look to Colombia, you guys have vallenato and cumbia. Are those genres evolving to where you think someday it might blow up and capture the world through artists that are using that type of music?
Well, in some ways, you can argue vallenato has to an extent. I mean, this vallenato music has become dancing at least a few artists, and it's funny because Carlos Vives did that and sort of introduced vallenato to the world. But within vallenato circles, he's not seen as a original vallenato artist.
Mm-hmm.
And but yeah, so I think there's been some, but it's also been a lot of mixing. And I'm glad that, and it's crazy that you noticed that Shakira was missing from the documentary, and I didn't. But when you think of her, like she was one of the strong voices in rock
Yeah,
en español.
early on,
That
it heard.
yeah,
Yeah, she
yeah,
was a
and she
huge
wasn't she
influence.
wasn't featured. And she had, but the funny thing is for me is like she had that almost like that Morissette voice, like very unique voice.
Yeah, yeah, her early work. I'm surprised that they just completely they excluded it from
Mm.
this documentary.
Yeah,
Well, I'm hopeful that there'll be other genres. So right now, like we said, el reggaeton y el trap en español, that's what's big, but that'll cool off a little bit. I think people just get tired of the same
yeah.
music, even the ones that are doing it, and then you get other waves. So let's see what the next one is. I do think also that electronic music is going to feature prominently in the future. So let's see which countries are the ones that are able to establish a scene in electronic music.
And I think Colombia is working on that too.
We'll see in 20 years. We want to see a documentary on like whatever the next wave is that sweeps across Latin America. We're gonna we'll be here to talk about it.
That's right. And we're actually looking for executive producers. So if you want to produce us, let us know, and we'll create this documentary for you.
All right, let's wrap it up. Thanks for the discussion. I thought it was good. There's definitely a lot more to say. on this topic. Maybe we can do our top 10 rock en español bands in some episode, in some future episode.
I'm already feeling conflicted about which songs I'm going to put, but yes, let's do it.
Okay, that's good. All right. Thanks for tuning in. If you all enjoy our content, make sure to check us out. We are Brown Perspective. Nos vemos.
Ciao.